according to the UN Special Envoy to Haiti, Bill O'Neill, that actually is the highest percentage of a population displaced in the world, more so than anywhere else. Not as an absolute number, of course, but as a percentage of Haiti's population. It's one of the 5 countries facing immediate risk of starvation, with over 5.7 million people acutely food insecure. Between June and August, there were 2,123 victims of intentional homicides recorded nationwide.
We welcome Sasha Filipova to the show, a senior staff attorney at the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti, to continue our coverage on the crisis in the region. I want to first start by thanking you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me, Brendan.
Yeah, and the pleasure is all ours. To start to kind of paint the picture, I guess, of how the crisis has worsened with kind of like food insecurity, these things, could you kind of paint the picture for these differing numbers and how things are looking on the ground?
The actual insecurity affecting Haiti civilians remains at catastrophic levels. Armed groups control, by some estimates, as much as 80 or 90% of the capital, Port-au-Prince, and the surrounding departments, and that geographic control has really been spreading out beyond that area. And what it means for civilians is a profound violation of their right to life and security and safety and dignity. Leaving the house or even staying in the house is potentially deadly, just given the level of violence. According to B News, which is the United Nations Integrated Office in Haiti, according to their latest report, between June and August, there were 2,123 victims of intentional homicides recorded nationwide. The number that UN reported for 2024 as a whole was 7,342. This is in a country of 11 or 12 million. There haven't been recent censuses. So it's just a catastrophic level of violence. And especially if you think about that, it's really concentrated around the capital and its surrounding areas. The people living there live in, daily, constant, present threat of violence and presence of death. So you see people in houses deliberately burned, sometimes people burned alive, corpses left in the streets. There are growing reports of organ trafficking. So, sort of as the violence has spread and metastasized, you're also seeing these armed groups really spread into transnational criminal network territory. So you're seeing sort of an increase of other horrific activities, all at the expense of Haitian civilian dignity. And sort of thinking about more the humanitarian situation that this results, in addition to just the levels of killing and injury. Haiti now has, by IOM, the International Organization for Migration, estimates 1.4 million people displaced. According to the UN Special Envoy to Haiti, Bill O'Neill, that actually is the highest percentage of a population displaced in the world, more so than anywhere else. Not as an absolute number, of course, but as a percentage of Haiti's population. And I guess I'll add one more note that the children are particularly harmed by the present crisis, including because they're so vulnerable, and we'll talk, I'm sure, about the humanitarian pieces of it, but they're so much more vulnerable to hunger and lack of healthcare and lack of education access. But also armed groups are actively recruiting children, and by some estimates, children are now more than half of armed group forces, which of course is a deep crime against them and a harm and a real impediment to resolving the crisis in the long term.
And yeah, so there's a lot of that, obviously, that I want to get into, that we will get into. First, though, I guess when it comes to conditions kind of on the ground from civilians, that obviously is exacerbated by access, or I guess a lack thereof access. So how has access to these various things been affected, from food and water to even like healthcare, education, shelter, these kinds of things?
Yeah, it's such an important question, and unfortunately, it parallels the horrific insecurity situation, although it permeates much more around the rest of the country as well. So Haiti's economy has been struggling for a long time and is currently in its 7th consecutive year of decline. Um, IGDH publishes biannual updates on the human rights situation in Haiti. We published our last one in July, and as of publication, 40% of the population was living in extreme poverty. And just as an illustration of what that looks like, Haiti is actually one of the countries in the world facing the most acute hunger. It's one of the five countries facing immediate risk of starvation, with over 5.7 million people acutely food insecure. And just to unpack that a little bit, that leaves 1.9 million people suffering what are called emergency levels of acute food insecurity. That means they're probably not even getting one meal a day. And another 3.8 million people, that's 34% of the population, are facing crisis levels of food insecurity, which means they're sort of trading away really important livelihood assets just to get basic nutritional needs met. And because the insecurity has sort of continued and is expanding with armed groups controlling territory and roads, that makes both food production and food access or distribution even more difficult, so that communities that are already at crisis levels just cannot get access to food. And add on top of that, the World Food Program just announced reductions of what was already really meager assistance. So the situation really is horrific for civilians. Add to that that water and sanitation are extremely limited. Healthcare is collapsing. The Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, just shut down another clinic. They permanently closed the care center in Turgot, which was actually a replacement for a different center in Port-au-Prince that they had closed. And mind you, MSF continues operating in places like Gaza, so they don't shut down over nothing. And this just shows, one, how bad the insecurity is, and two, just how inaccessible healthcare is for most Haitians. And sort of combine that with the lack of access to safe water and sanitation, and we're seeing cholera surge, which is, further adversely impacted by the fact that it's storm season right now. So just a really terrible situation. One other piece, sort of dovetailing with what I mentioned about the distinct harms on children in Haiti, is that as of the end of August, 1,606 schools were closed. Some of those partially, but 1,087 of those fully. So, by some estimates, there are 700,000 kids in Haiti not going to school.
And see, that's why it's such like a complex issue. That's why I've always been kind of drawn to Haiti and covering it. Is there's so many layers, I feel like, from like the humanitarian stuff, then there's like the political instability and stuff, and like economic, and then also violence, and which is what I want to ask you about next. And then even when we kind of talk about violence, I feel like there's the different layers. Like in the past, I know we've talked about like sexual violence, gender-based violence. You're talking about like violence against children, and I mean, I'm sure there's a multitude of others as well. Could you kind of describe the ways that Haiti has been impacted this way as of this year?
Um, do you mean like
Like,
the
well,
interaction of these factors?
yeah, like, well, what are the numbers, I guess, or how is violence kind of playing out as this continues in Haiti?
Like, you're so right to talk about that in terms of all these intersecting complex factors. And I'll layer one more to make it even more interesting, and sort of one of the many reasons that I think Haiti is such an important place to watch really carefully. But some of Haiti's vulnerabilities to these challenges, and especially some of the kind of humanitarian challenges it's facing, are really the result of long-term foreign interference in Haiti, and sort of extractive colonial and then neo-colonial and imperialist practices. So whether it's the independence debt that was imposed by France when Haiti first won its independence and robbed Haiti of its wealth well into the 21st century, um, sorry, 20th century, or the U.S. occupation, where the U.S. stole Haiti's gold reserves and really centralized the system that, one, exploited labor, and two, really impeded the development of effective institutions, or the U.S. government's support of dictatorships under the Duvaliers that really decimated Haiti's institutions and impeded sort of the ability of the government to be responsive to the needs of its people, and then orchestrating coups against a democratically elected government that was actually trying to prioritize these things. What it's created is a profound vulnerability to crisis, and a a challenge of development that is the product of having its resources stolen for so many years by external actors, so that Haiti couldn't invest in an effective education sector, an effective justice sector, et cetera, which leaves it really vulnerable. And just sort of as an acute illustration of this, we're all watching in horror the harms arising from Hurricane Melissa right now, which hit Jamaica and Cuba particularly hard, but also hit Haiti. And from the available reports right now, the death toll in Haiti is actually much higher than anywhere else. We're seeing at least 25 reported dead and 18 missing, even though Haiti wasn't as directly hit. And that is the result of an sort of an impediment to investing in sort of necessary infrastructure and tools, and just illustrates sort of the complexity of that dynamic. So having added that additional layer, I think it's really important to understand about the spiraling violence right now, that we have these armed groups that are taking over increasing amounts of territory. We have an illegitimate government that was sort of meant to be a government of transition, but has really lost credibility, including because they've been unable to address the crisis and have not really prioritized the needs of the population and have been mired by corruption. And then you see that government now hire private contractors who are using drones, and we're seeing a rising number of civilian casualties in those attacks. And then, especially because the government has been so absent and ineffective, you're seeing a rise of community defense groups who really understandably are trying to protect their communities against the violence perpetrated by armed groups. But the problem is, the longer that this goes on, the more we're seeing those community groups commit violence themselves, and we're seeing a rise in extrajudicial killings, some of those together with police actors. And there's a particularly prolific public prosecutor that's been responsible for a high number of extrajudicial executions. But it really creates a really complicated security dynamic where you have a growing number of actors, all with different agendas, and a real division in communities, such that people from particular neighborhoods will be stigmatized by people from other neighborhoods because they're either assumed to be members of armed groups, or they're members of community protection groups who are going after sort of young people indiscriminatory because they assume they're members of armed groups, et cetera, which makes prospects for securing peace and community reconciliation much more complicated. And again, unfortunately, we're not seeing the transitional government or its international partners really do an effective job of responding to that insecurity, to the underlying governance and corruption challenges, and then the surrounding humanitarian and human rights limitations and abuses. So you're not seeing services come out of the government, et cetera. And the displacement sites are sort of a particularly acute illustration, with people in displacement sites just experiencing truly horrific day to day. So a lack of access to food, to water, basic services. They're also very dangerous places, especially for women and girls. You're seeing high levels of sexual violence directed at them, including because there's a lack of security and lighting. Because sort of there's a lack of effective decision making and governance around this, and you're seeing sort of women excluded from management roles in these displacement sites. You're seeing a rise of sexual exploitation and abuse. So people with positions of authority and access to humanitarian resources really using that as a means of exploiting those who are vulnerable, and primarily women and girls, for sexual favors in return for basic food, shelter, et cetera.